Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is going to be a topic stream where we're going to be going over the Middle East conflict, mostly between Jerusalem and, Palestine and Jerusalem are the Jewish people and Muslim people of Palestine. And it's been a ongoing issue for many years, and there's a few kind of things I've known about the conflict, but really I don't know particularly too much about the history of why the conflict has been so huge or why it's such a big problem for both of the parties involved. So I thought today I would spend time looking over kind of some of the history and brushing up on why this might be the case and some theories behind it. And then tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have Getting the Answers, where we're going to also be going over the most recent conflict between the Gaza Strip and Palestine and Israel and many places within the border. And the cease order and missiles are rockets, whatever you want to ultimately call them, that they were attacking each other with. So we're going to be talking about recent stuff and probably going over the history of what led up to it as well. So this is just kind of a prep for that video and just making sure that I know all of the information I'm going to need to know to be fully prepped to do that video tomorrow and have some things to say with my co-host on that topic stream. So I just quickly wanted to mention that I am in the middle of making a couple of solo videos, and one of those solo videos I am making is going to be a way too early GOP 2024 presidential tier list on the candidates who I think are the strongest to the candidates who are the weakest, and why I think they are strong or weak. And I just think it's kind of a funny idea, a fun thing to do as we wait many years till we get to 2024. And potentially I'm thinking about doing these once a year up to the election, where many of these people could even change or decide not to run, and new people could be added to this tier list, or somebody who is very popular now may not be very popular then, or vice versa. So I just think it'll be kind of a fun idea. So I am in the middle of making this tier list, and no, the people that are on there are not my only two people I have done. I just was, as I was getting this ready, I accidentally put those images on those squares. So maybe you will see one of those people on C or D, but I'm not going to tell you for sure if they are now. But anyway, I just thought it'd be kind of a fun idea. So I just thought I would quickly shout that out. But let's get into the main reason why we are here for today's video. And that is with the Middle East conflict and background. The majority of this video is going to be the history of this Middle East conflict and what led up to the most recent events of numerous deaths and numerous rockets being launched at each other, missiles, whatever you want to call it. As we wait for this ad to go through, let me skip through it. Oh, we have to wait 4 more seconds. Lovely. I love ads. They're so fun. I love them. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to be going over kind of the history of that first, and then we'll be moving on from there. So we'll start with just this first website that I found, and it was last updated in 2006. This was 15 years before the most recent events, but once again, we're more talking about history. So let's just read through a little bit of this, where they have a map kind of showing some of the conflicts up to and including the war. So this is the 1800s to World War II, as it says here. I'm going to resize this real quick so that we can see it as a full image. 1 second here, everybody. Okay, that should help us a little bit being able to see it. Alright, here we go. So from the 1800s to World War II. Towards the end of the 1800s, question arose as to how the Jewish people could overcome the increasing persecution and anti-Semitism in Europe. The biblical Promised Land led to a political movement, Zionism, to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine in the Middle East. From the 1920s to 1947, the British Empire had a mandate over Palestine at the time. Palestine included all of Israel and today's occupied territories of Gaza, West Bank, etc. The increasing number of Jewish people immigrating to the Holy Land increased tensions in the regions. European geopolitics in the earlier half of the 20th century and the wider Middle East region contributed to a lot of instability overall. The British Empire especially played a major role in that region. During World War I in 1916, it convinced Arab leaders to revolt against the Ottoman Empire, which is allied with Germany. In return, the British government would support the establishment of an independent Arab state in a nation, including Palestine. Yet, in contraction to this, and to also get support of the Jewish people in 1917, Lord Arthur Balfour, the then British Foreign Minister, issued a declaration that the Balfour Declaration. This announced the British Empire's support for the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. As a further complication, there was a duel between the Imperial Britain and France to carve up the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire and divide control of that region. The spoils of war were to be shared as with the 1885's Berlin Conference, where Africa was carved up against the various European empires' parts, and the Middle East be carved up as well. Now we're going to go a little bit more in history, post-World War II to 2000s. After World War II, the newly formed United Nations, which then had less developing countries as recommended, blah 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 blah, the minority Jewish people received the majority of the land. U.S. support for Israel's state was driven by international politics, as the Cato Institute notes. And they have their note here. We'll go ahead and read through it. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to recommend participation of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. The two states were to be joined in an economic union, and Jerusalem would be administered by the United Nations. The Arabs would get 43% of the land, the Jews 57%, and proposed apportionment should be assessed in light of the following facts. The Jewish portion was better land. By the end of 1947, the percentage of Palestine purchased by Jews was less than 7%. Jewish land purchases accounted for only 10% of the proposed Jewish state. The Jews made up less than 1/3 of the population of Palestine. Moreover, the Jewish state was included 497,000 Arabs, who could constitute just under 50% of the new state's population. The United States not only accepted the UN plan, it aggressively promoted it along with the other members of the United Nations. U.S. President Harry Truman had been personally moved by the Treaty of the Jews by the condition of the refugees. That purchase was his earlier studies of the Bible made him open to the argument that immigration to Palestine was the proper remedy for the surviving Jews of Europe. Yet he acknowledged later in his memoirs that he was fully aware of the Arabs' hostility to the Jewish settlement in Palestine. He, like his predecessor, had promised he would take no action without fully consulting the Arabs. Then he went off track. Truman's decision to support the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine was made against the advice of most of the State Department and other foreign policy experts, who were concerned about the U.S. relations with the Arabs and possible Soviet penetration of the region. Secretary James Forrestal of the Defense Department and Lloyd Henderson, at the time the State Department's chief of the Near Eastern Affairs, pressed these points most vigorously. Henderson warned that the prohibition would only create anti-Americanism but would also require U.S. troops to enforce it, and he stated his belief that the partition violated both U.S. and UN principles of self-determination, which is kind of interesting because if you think about it, I would think that that would be the case. That would be the case. But a lot of these, especially foreign politics, is a lot more complex than even internal politics of just your own nation, say the United States or whatever you want to ultimately call it. So it is kind of interesting that it mentioned that as well. But we're going to pass by this just a little bit. While the Jewish people were successful in creating their homeland, there is no Palestine and no internationalism of Judaism. Either in 1948, for example, Palestinians were driven out of the new Israel into refugee camps in Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, and other regions. At least 750,000 people are said to have been driven out or ethnically cleansed, as some have described it. It should be noted that many Jews were also expelled from surrounding Arab countries. Zionist organizations and even some Arab nations also encountered many Jews to immigrate to Israel. As the Palestinians expelled, Jews often had their own land and/or bank accounts and other property seized. In 1956, Britain, France, and Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula after Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal because there were waning empires feared further loss of power. This time of a major economic trading route, entry point for the West and the River of the Middle East. While Egypt was defeated, international U.S. really pressure forced their withdrawal. So again, we're going back to some history of Britain and France still being heavily involved in what the creation of this land or to be looking like, from where Palestine citizens were allowed to live and where Jewish citizens of Israel, or whatever you want to call it, were then allowed to leave. But we see here, in 1967, Israel simultaneously attacked Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in a preemptive strike against the Arab troops along its border. Israel captured key pieces of land, such as strategic Golan Heights to the north on the border with Syria. What? Did my titles not update? Hang on a second here. I don't think my titles update. Let me check on something real quick here. It looks like this title did not update. Let's see. We don't want that. No, it did. On YouTube's it says it did. Okay, let me go to Twitch and check to see if the Twitch title updated. If not, we can fix that real quickly. I just want to make sure I'm thinking the right thing here. Nope, okay, so our Twitch title did not update. So let me fix that real quick. Okay, let's see. Change. Let's see. We gotta go to change the title real quick. No, don't want that. Don't want that. Want that, don't want that. Let's change this to politics. As we're changing the title real quick, let's go up here. The history of the Middle East conflict and updates now. Okay, our title should be changed. Sorry about that, I just noticed that we were in the wrong category, plus we were in the wrong title. So no wonder people would be quite confused, because no, I am not playing chess right now. In fact, we are talking about the Middle East conflict. Those are two very, very different things. So let's hope that our title did update. I'm going to refresh and check back here before we continue on. Let's just make sure. Yep, alright, looks like our title did update. So once again, sorry about that. That's the privilege of doing live streams. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of on-air productions, but we have figured it out. So let's just keep going here. In 1967, Israel simultaneously attacked Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in a preemptive strike against the Arab troops along its border. Israel captured key pieces of land such as strategic Golan Heights to the north on the border with Syria, to the west bank from Jordan, and the Gaza Strip from Egypt. In fact, Israel more than doubled its size in the 6 days that war took place. Since then, negotiations have been around returning land to pre-1967 states as required by the international law and UN resolutions. Excuse me. Let's scroll down just a little bit more. In 1993 saw the Oslo Peace Accord, whereby Israel recognized the PLO and gave them limited autonomy in the return for peace and end of the Palestine claims on Israeli territory. This has been largely criticized as one-sided accord that benefits only Israel, not the Palestine people. It resulted in Israel's control of land, water, roads, and other resources. In 1994, Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and Jericho, ending 20 years of occupation, a police force repelled them. The Oslo Police Accords is something I need to remember here. I'm going to highlight that. And actually, we're going to highlight all this so I get context real quick in case I forget, because sometimes I am prone in forgetting things like that. Let's scroll past our video ideas. There we go. Alrighty, let's make sure we have that down. Alright, good to go. In 1994, Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, we read that. In 1995, the then Israeli Prime Minister, who had been involved in the latest peace processes, was assassinated by a Jewish extremist. In April 1996, Israel forces bombed Lebanon for 17 days, retaliating by firing upon populated areas of northern Israel. Israel also shelled a UN shelter, killing about 100 out of 800 civilians sheltering there. The UN claimed it was intentional. October 1998 saw the Way River moratorium outlining some Israel withdrawal from the West Bank, but suspended it in January 1999 due to internal disagreement on its implementation. and then it talks a little bit about the conflict now, but we are going to go ahead and move on to our next source because we are more focused on the history of the Middle East conflict more than anything else so far, so that I can build up a good understanding and good topics for what to do in the future here. So we're going to read a little bit, probably going to hear some similar stuff, but it's not necessarily a problem on that one. So let's continue. In 1947, Great Britain, which had ruled the area known as Palestine since 1920, announces that it would transfer responsibilities to the United Nations. The population in Palestine is 2/3 Arab and 1/3 Jewish. Although Jewish settlers are only 6% of the land, many of the Jews are refugees from Europe and the Holocaust. American President Harry Truman had been pushing for a greater Jewish immigration to Palestine while Britain had resisted it. November 29th, a UN-sponsored portion plan passes the General Assembly 33-13 with 10 observations under this plan. Palestine would be divided into a Jewish state with 56.47% of the land and an Arab state with 43.53% of the land, while Jerusalem will become an international proletariat. Although the United States, Soviet Union, and Jewish settlers accept the plan, Arab countries reject it and the plan is never implemented. So again, we've kind of read some of the same stuff from the site previous to this one, but I still think there needs to be a question brought up here when we're thinking about this of why they would reject such a plan. And I don't ultimately think that you have to think that hard on why they would reject this plan, because it does appear, and most likely is the case, that they were the underdog in this plan, and they were the people that were getting less resources, less attention than they thought they should have. So by them being the underdog, and by them being the people who were considered to be lesser than what values they were getting in return, they decided to reject the offer, which makes a lot of sense. Usually when anybody's wanting to sign a peace treaty, or when anybody's wanting to sign a contract, you want to be on the winning side of that contract and peace treaty, either through resources of money or by resources of simply looking better in return, maybe by more land or more people, whatever the case may ultimately be. You want to be on the victorious side of that plan, even if it is something like a peace treaty. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that that example above is a peace treaty. It's more just dividing of land and dividing of resources. So it's more of a treaty in that way. A treaty is probably a wrong word in this, but I think everybody gets what I'm kind of trying to say here. You want to be on the victorious side of what you're talking about here. So let's move on to 1948. In 1948, May 14th, following months of hostilities between Jewish and Arab forces, David Ben-Gurion proclaims the establishment of the State of Israel. Both the United States and the Soviet Union quickly expand their diplomatic region, but neighboring Arab states, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon, invade Israel. Israeli forces are largely victorious in the ensuing fighting, which results in the creation of several 100,000 Palestinian refugees. So you see a first attack on Palestine, resulting in many Palestinians not having any more homes, and starting anger from the Palestinian people for a conflict that they probably didn't think that they should be involved in, and therefore they decided to fight back a little bit, as we would see later on. In 1949, June, more than a year of wars end with a series of armistices between Israel and neighboring Arab states. Israel gains about 50% more territory than it would have had under the original UN plan, including West Jerusalem, while Jordan takes the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt assumes control of the Gaza Strip. Although the UN Resolution 194 has called for a right of return for all peaceful refugees, their status remains unresolved. So the UN jumped in and hoped to solve the situation because the United Nations, in fact, is somebody that you would want to make sure you would resolve the issue for. In other words, the UN was created to do this very thing, to solve issues between two countries and to be humanitarian for the people who are refugees and without homes. And this is once again where a lot of people think that the UN has failed, and I could see why people would have that perspective, especially when you look at this event here. And hello, Pierre. Hopefully I said that right. I'm terrible with names, but hello there. Good evening to you as well. Hopefully you're having a good day, good night, good evening, good morning, wherever the time it is for you. Since you said evening, I'm assuming it's probably evening for you, but you never know. Let's continue on with our little timeline here. Quite correct. So it is evening. Yeah, that's what I was assuming. In 1951, July 20th, Jordan's King Abdullah, I think that's right, is assassinated while visiting a mosque in Jerusalem. His 17-year-old grandson, Hussam, will be crowned 1 year later. Israel's conflict and making a law to Israel in September. Don't be mad. What do you mean? You'll have to explain that one to me. Let's scroll down a little bit and fast forward just a little bit more. Let's go down to... This looks like a pretty good year, so let's go a little bit before this to 1967. 1967. Allah means when a Jew moves to the homeland. Oh no, I understand that, but I'm not sure what you meant. Okay, so you're just saying you're moving back to Israel in September, if I understand that right. That's probably right. I don't know. My head's a woo. I'm not bad. I'm more just trying to understand this, the history of it, because, you know, obviously with the most recent stuff, and I'm going to get to that later, I just wanted to get a good timeline and a good understanding of exactly what is happening in this conflict, because my dad's mentioned and podcasts that I've listened to have mentioned that this conflict has happened for a very long time. So I'm a big fan at looking at history of things, because I believe that you can study history and you'll be able to understand what's happening now a lot better if you understand the history of it. Pierre says everyone is mad at us when we say we move home. History-wise, Palestine was never a country, it was part of Jordan. Arabs came long after the Israelis. Yeah, yep. I don't know why they would necessarily be mad at you. I know that especially a lot of Twitch content creators are more on the leftist side of the spectrum. I've seen a lot of Palestinian support in this on Twitch, which is interesting, and I haven't really seen too many Israel support, but I'm sure it exists on Twitch. It just depends on where you look, really. But that's kind of why I wanted to look back on the history here. But let's continue on. May, June, Nasser, I think I said that. Anyway, let's just go. Closest the Israel shipping, blocking its access to the Red Sea, and prepares to attack. On June 5th, Israel launches a preemptive strike, destroying the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. The subsequent Six-Day War roughly doubles the size of Israel. The Israelis size the Sandy, West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Excuse me. Nearly 500,000 Palestinians are displaced by this round of fighting. November 29th, Resolution 242 calls for Israeli withdrawal from all of what become known as the occupied territories. The United States, which had affirmed Israel's right to free passage through the straits by force if necessary, in Israel's military and operations, but later supports withdrawal from the occupied territories, although President Lyndon Johnson's administration does not specify how much captured land Israel should relinquish. So once again, you have the United States in this case, and the UN also in this case stepping in to resolve the issue of conflict here. And it looks like they are saying that Israel took a little bit too much of a too large of a step and need to take a couple steps backwards and give up some of the land they have conquered, because they conquered this land in a improper way. So that is kind of interesting. But let's continue on and see what they have to say. Okay, we're getting close to the big part of this timeline, and a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but there's a lot of information on the year after this one, but I wanted to go up a little bit just to get some context on things, but let's keep going. Let's go to December 26th. We don't have to go through all of this here. December 26th, 2 PFLP fighters attack an fight on the ground in Athens, killing a passenger, and are subsequently captured. In retaliation, Israeli forces destroyed 13 aircrafts at the Beirut airport. And this is also a common theme when it comes to Israel versus Palestine, or Israel versus the Middle East, or Israel versus whatever country you want to call it, really. Is that Israel always tends to take it a step further than what happened, especially when you talk about the more recent attacks from Hamas targeting Israel and many places within there. Is that they would attack with these unguided rockets or unguided missiles, whatever you want to call it, and Israel would fire back with their much more updated missile strikes, where they were able to target something directly, and much more sophisticated weapons in general, and they responded to it. And if you follow people who are more right-leaning and like Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager, people like that who are content creators on the right, they say that Israel was right to do so because they got attacked first, and it was a self-defense mechanism, and simply Israel doing nothing goes against any country, because the first policy of a country is to protect its people, and that is why you are the leader of the country and why countries have a military. And because Israel's technology and weaponry is more advanced doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't use it. So you had a lot of that coming from that, and especially people like Ben Shapiro, and I'm sure Dennis Prager would probably say a similar thing. But I know for sure Ben Shapiro has a huge thing about Hamas, and I also see that Pierre has put what I was about to say there. So I'll go ahead and read Pierre's comment and expand a little bit more. Pierre said, "But we always win," which is kind of what I was alluding to. Notice the trend in history that we are the ones that always get attacked. Then we go to his last comment, which is the one I was kind of talking about here. Hamas are hiding among civilians, and IDF always warned before we bomb. So if you believe people like Ben Shapiro, and I don't have necessarily a reason not to believe what Ben Shapiro has been saying, he's been saying that Hamas oftentimes has their headquarters or uses people as a way to avoid targeting from Israel. Excuse me. What I mean by that is Hamas has been known to put their headquarters in, say, a daycare with Palestinian babies, or put their headquarters in a hospital with Palestinian mothers and children and probably babies, because it is a hospital. So they use that the human shield conflict, or the human shield problem, has been something that Ben Shapiro has been saying a ton about and talking about a lot, because Ben Shapiro is a proponent on Israel being the person who is the most right in this situation, because as also Pierre said, they always warn before the bomb, and there was a famous clip that Shapiro used on a show, I think like 4 or 5 days ago, where he played a clip of Israel letting one of the leaders of the building know, I believe it was a hospital, know that they were going to strike, and giving people time to leave that hospital or leave whatever building that was. It may have been, I think it was a hospital. I like you. You are somewhat nuanced on politics on Twitch. You read on both sides. Well, thank you very much. I try to have a middle approach when it comes to topics. I don't always think I am middle. Everybody has their bias, and I definitely have my bias. But I try to at least understand from both sides, because no side is 100% right, in my opinion. Usually it's whatever's in the middle is most correct. And the middle's not always right, but knowing what both sides say is, I think, very important. Well, let's continue to their big year here of 1969. In February, the RFAT, I probably butchered that, takes over the PLU of the PFLP, again taxing El Al, fight on the ground, this time in Zurich. The plane's co-pilot dies from his injuries and 5 others are wounded. One PFLP member is killed and the others are captured. Now we'll go to August. August, for the first time, the PFLP targets an American airline hijacking a TWA flight from Rome to Tel Aviv. The leader of this operation is a 25-year-old native of Hafia named Leela, I'm just going to say Leela, whose family was forced to flee Lebanon during the 1948 war. She had accomplished divert the plane to Damascus and demount a palm in the cockpit after it landed. I am butchering this, but let's keep going. All passengers except 2 Israeli men are quickly released. Those 2 are exchanged for 13 Syrians held by the Israeli government. 2 weeks later, 3 PFLP members are arrested before boarding a TWA flight in Athens that they plan to skyjack. Pierre says, I say this, no Jew can live in an Arab country, but Arabs can live in Israel. This is the difference. Again, that is also another Shapiro point that he said, and I've listened to his show quite a couple of times this past week because I was interested to see what he had to say about all of this, because I'm not a particular fan of Ben Shapiro, but I knew that he was going to have a very right-leaning perspective and a perspective of being Jewish on this situation. Although he doesn't live in Israel or doesn't live in any of the Holy Lands, he's been there before and he is Jewish. So I was interested to hear his opinion, and that was another thing that he brought up. And I think that is most likely true. I don't know if you could say it with certainty, but you can definitely see that there's a lot more positive examples on one side than there is on the other side when it comes to living conditions. And he even brought up an example where Israeli nurses and doctors were treating Palestinian refugees, and the Palestinian person was like, yeah, I don't think this would ever happen if it was the other way around, and she was kind of shocked by it. So I think that is an anecdotal example, but I do think you can have many other examples also with that situation. And while I have you here, Pierre, I am doing a live stream on this topic tomorrow with my co-host at 10 a.m. Central Time or 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Eastern Time. So if you're free then, you can definitely watch your show. If not, you can always catch the recorded version of it. But I think it's going to be interesting because he is also Christian. He's not Jewish. But I think he's a big fan of history and a big fan of philosophy, and I'm pretty sure that he is probably going to have a lot of things to say on this situation. So I think it's going to be a interesting episode. Pierre says, yes, Israel tried to send medical equipment to Gaza 3 days ago, and they attacked the convoy. I didn't hear about that. I wasn't bringing that as the situation that I mentioned, but that is kind of surprising if that is true, and I have no reason to believe that that probably isn't true, but like I said, I think there's just way too many examples to prove one side and way too many examples to prove the other side when it comes to who was nicer to the enemy, if you want to put it that way. And I just spilled over myself. Anyway. Alright, let's continue on here. Well, let's go down to September 7th. In the morning, the hijackers issue their demands, giving the governments where citizens are on board 72 hours to release Palestinian militants held in Europe and Israel, or the hostages will be killed. The European government involved in the United States agreed to negotiate with the PFLP via the Red Cross, but Israeli refugees. Meanwhile, the Palestinian forces at the Revolution Airport have been surrounded by Jordanian troops. After a period of negotiation, the guerrillas agreed to release 127 women and children in exchange for a bullpup of Jordanian forces. These hostages are taken to Amman Hotel, but all Jewish women and children are kept on the plains. The night, the PFLP also removes 3 U.S. government employees, 2 rabbis, and a man named Jerry Bababah, and takes them to a secret location 100 miles away in case the Israelis try to mount a rescue operation. Pierre says, any killing of children is evil, though, that I will say. Palestinian or Israeli, no children or civilians should ever be harmed. 100%. 100%. I think regardless of whatever you align yourself politically, left, progressive left, right, extreme right, centrist, libertarian, whatever you want to call yourself, I think everybody would agree with that. Any harm to people in general is a bad thing, and especially any harm to children is an even worse thing, regardless of whatever political aisle you are on or whatever your beliefs are. So I think that statement is 100% true, and that is why there's always a little bit of conflict between both sides. And let me get rid of this ad here real quick. There it goes. Alright, well, I was too slow. Gotta love ads. That's only the second one on the video, so we're not doing too bad, but I don't want to jinx it. But anyway, as I was saying, there's a lot of nuance in this situation. I don't think it's crystal clear on who is... Both sides are wrong in this situation. Now, you could argue which side is worse, and that's definitely something you can argue. But, yeah. Get Adblock. Man, I'm telling you. I downloaded Adblock, and then I guess it's just... I'm gonna have to re-download. Let's just put it that way. There's... so many ads when you're watching videos. Whew, it honestly kills me. Anyway, let's continue on. President Richard Nixon assembles his advisors to discuss an American response. He later phones Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird and instructs him to bomb the PFLP positions. But Laird claims the weather is not favorable for an airstrike. Laird would later say that the American troops still in Vietnam, he was opposed to any military action and used the weather as an excuse. Which is kind of interesting to say, President, the weather's just a little bit bad. I don't think we need to do this. He's like, oh, thank God the weather was bad. What happens if the weather was not bad? I'll just make up a radar. No, that is interesting as an excuse not to do so, but probably a good thing that it didn't happen anyway. Let's go down to a little bit more of some modern things here. This is actually a really good timeline. Let's go to 1978, because I see Jimmy Carter here. 1978. President Jimmy Carter, host Sadat, and the Israeli Prime Minister began at Camp David, Maryland, producing a series of accords that led to peace between the two states. In March 1979, the treaty Egypt recognizes Israel's right to exist, and Israel agrees to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. I don't think I'm saying that name right, but it's okay. Let's scroll down a little bit more to 1987. December the 1st, Palestinian Antifada, our uprising, begins against Israeli troops in Gaza, soon spreading to the West Bank. Demonstrators throw stones and stage civilian disobedience. By the time it ends in 1993, more than 1,000 Palestinians will have died. Sinai. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Sometimes I wonder why I decide to do things like this, because my reading is superb. It's excellent. Perfect reading. Anyway, let's continue. Thank you. 1993. President Bill Clinton supports the Oslo Accords between the PLO and Israel, which cumulative an agreement between Arafat and Israel Prime Minister and a historic handshake on the White House lawn. As part of the agreement, the PLO renounces terrorism in Israel, agrees to limited Palestinian sovereignty, the parts of Gaza and the West Bank. Additional agreements will expand areas under Palestinian control in the coming years. Yeah, not quite correct. Yeah, I'll have to hear it. But I am good at on videos, especially like when I was learning languages. Really, I was just learning French. I would be able to hear something and be able to say it, and I'm good with that. But anyway, yeah, no problem, Pierre. Take your time. In 2000, President Clinton tries and fails to engineer another Israeli-Palestine agreement. A visit by Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem sparks a second intifada. The coming years will feature both renewed bloodshed and halting step towards Palestinian self-rule and eventual statehood. So their timeline ends in 2000. So we can go on to our next timeline and just read a little bit to see what they have to say. And then we can get on to our first video here. Let's make sure we're not missing here. Nope. Okay, we're good. Let's keep going. Let's see, where do we want to start here? Actually, I think we're going to move to our video now. This will be good for me to read before the video tomorrow, but I think it's going to repeat a lot of the same things. So I think we could go ahead and move on to our video, and I can resize our stream just a little bit once this gets loaded. And this is ironically by Dan Crenshaw, and I thought it was going to be interesting to put for my friend Dan Crenshaw, because frankly I was just interested to see what he was going to say about this situation. There's probably better videos out there talking about the history and timeline, but I don't know, I just figured I would pick this one, because why not? I feel like I could get a few laughs from Dan Crenshaw. And I'm not necessarily a big fan of Mr. Crenshaw. I'll make that pretty obvious. But anyway, I just figured this would be interesting to see what he has to say. Definitely from a right-leaning perspective, for sure. Oh, I gotta pause our background music. I don't think we need some killer beats in the background as we listen to this video. Let's go back down to here. Full screen this sucker again. And then we can get into the video here. And this is actually the second time I've ever listened to his podcast. So this is going to be pretty interesting. And we're not going to listen to a full hour of this. I'm probably going to skip around a little bit. But let's just keep going and let's just start this video before I keep blabbering on here.
That all men are created equal. As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts. My staff, who shall not be named. We'll call him Kevin. He's a real expert on this stuff, so we're going to have a great...
Hello, Big Poppy. Good afternoon. Interesting name you have. I'll say that. Interesting name. But good afternoon to you as well. We're just going to be watching this video by Dan Crenshaw on his podcast. Frankly, I was just interested to see what he had to say about the situation. We might not play all the video. Actually, in fact, we're not going to play all this video. We're going to skip around. But let's just get to it.
Conversation. We're going to dive into what happened recently, why these rocket attacks are happening, what the conflict actually is right now. But then we're gonna go down a few layers and help you understand the history of this.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Crenshaw either. But like I was saying, just before you arrived, or maybe as you arrived, I thought I could get a few laughs from Mr. Crenshaw. He's very, 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 very cringe. Very cringe. especially his campaign ad. If you want to laugh, go check out his campaign ad. Like, for real, it is terrible, terrible ad. The fake Avengers one, oh, it's terrible. We may actually give that a look. We may give that a look. We need a good break after this, I think. Remind me to play that if you're still here. But, let's just watch a little bit.
And it is complicated. I've taken a couple trips to Israel at this point and gotten the best of the best information. And, so I've gotten pretty well read on the issue. And it's still, I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface. And we'll try to scratch that surface a little bit more today. But, look, if you wonder why so many of your kind-hearted left-wing friends always seem to take the side of the Palestinians, well, it's because they view everything through the lens of victims and oppressors. There's this belief that Palestinians are eternal victims and that the Israelis are eternal oppressors. Now, this isn't the only place that sort of optic plays out for the left, right? You see it on our border. You had AOC comparing.
So here we go again. We're 2 minutes into this video, including his introduction that he has for the content here. So that adds another like 30 seconds, 40 seconds or whatever to his introduction, because his podcast has a very long introduction to it. And then he goes on to start talking about the conflict here and the perception that people are having with a conflict like this. Excuse me. And let's put it this way. One of the things the right loves to do is talk about identity politics and how bad identity politics is. Just because you're black doesn't mean you do this, or because you're black you do this. If you're Asian it's this, if you're white you're this, blah 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 blah. They love to point out the identity politics that people talk about in the left media and left content creators or celebrities, whatever you want to say. But when it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to the Middle East conflict, when it comes to Israel versus Palestine, or Palestine versus Israel, whatever you want to call it, they're quick to point out the same thing, but turn it to a right identity politics. And then they mentioned AOC and the border, because obviously AOC is progressive left, and is hated by many of the Dan Crenshaw supporters. So again, I hate that politicians always like to do this, and right-wing content creators fall into the same trap that left-wing content creators do as well, but they just do it in a different way. But both of them, the way content creators do it is a bad way either way. So I just hate that it always goes down to that, and one side says it is this, the other side says it isn't this, but then they use the same example. So it's just, I don't know.
The Israeli-Palestinian situation to the U.S. and our border crisis. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but it goes to show you how they see things. All right, the BLM riots throughout the entirety of 2020, this was fundamentally about spinning a narrative that there are oppressors and that there are victims, and that you must be in either category. Unless you're on the left, then you get to be the champion of the victims. Now, this makes them feel good. This helps you understand, I think, why this has become so popular on college campuses and in Democrat circles to be cheering for Palestinians. Now, the problem is, again, truth gets in the way of this. And it is not necessarily true that just because you are smaller and weaker that you have some kind of moral high ground. And that's a really important point, and that's what we're going to unpack, I think, through the rest of this episode. Kevin, thanks for being back on. Can you give us an update on what you're hearing? You follow this stuff really closely. Where are we right now in Israel? This has been going on for 3 days. We'll get to why it started here in a second, but what's the current status out there?
So as of right now, there's been right under 2,000 rockets fired from Gaza into Israel. So that's the main.
One thing to note here, as I was stating earlier, the attack of aggression started from Gaza through Hamas and targeting Israel directly, obviously. But one thing that I mentioned earlier is that their missiles were unguided missiles. So simply they were launching in an area, but they didn't know exactly where the rocket was going to hit. And when Israel decided to respond, they had targeted missiles. They had guided missiles. They were able to actually target specific locations. So because Gaza's rockets were loose cannons, so to speak, and they didn't exactly know exactly where they were going to land, you could say that they could cause more harm. But you could also say that by having a targeted missile, you can directly target specific things and specific population areas, you would be able to have more of an impact because of that and be able to potentially kill more people, or at least target the people directly because of it. And you did see a little bit of that as a response from Israel, but I just wanted to state that out. And I don't know exactly where you could say who's more wrong. Like I said also earlier, as Ben Shapiro was kind of talking about another right-wing creator here, or he's not a politician, but he kind of is. But everybody knows Ben Shapiro. He was kind of saying that Israel responding back is self-defense, and the first responsibility of a nation is to protect its citizens. So, I don't know. It's a complex issue for sure, but I just wanted to throw it out there just before they say anything more on the issue.
I think that a lot of people are hearing about. So, these rockets range from homemade improvised weapons that they take a pipe, attach tail fins, improvise an explosive, and shoot it. These don't have a lot of range. But what's really unique about what's happening now with this current rocket barrage isn't just the intensity of it, but it's some of the armaments that are being used, more advanced rocket systems. Not to mention drones. So loitering munitions, as they're called. So what these are is they're kamikaze drones, which are piloted, are able to linger over a target. They're able to be moved by the pilot and strike. So these drones look very similar to an Iranian product that they've been putting out and that they've been sending to their proxies in Yemen, Shia militias in Syria and Iraq. So that's the indirect fire aspects going on. The Israeli response has been to target Hamas leadership, operatives, infrastructure such as rocket launching sites, caches, intelligence facilities, and recently, so that's mainly been done by the IAF, the Israeli Air Force. Mm-hmm. But last night, the IDF, the ground component, joined in, and they moved to the Gaza border. Now, there was a little bit of some clumsy tweeting, which led a lot of people to think that a ground operation into Gaza had begun. But what's really happened is now it's been opened up with some artillery fire that has been used to target what's called Gaza Metro. So thinking of a metro as an underground tunnel system that you use to get around.
So before Crenshaw has his response here, our Crenshaw, I don't know why I find that funny. Anyway, like I was mentioning earlier, they kind of briefly talked about it. Israel's response, instead of targeting innocent civilians directly because their missiles were unguided, because once again their missiles are guided. Did that make sense? Anyway, but if Israel responded with unguided missiles, they could have potentially killed civilians as Hamas did, because their missiles were untargeted. But because Israel had guided missiles and was able to have accurate targeting, they were able to target military leaders of Hamas and in areas where other missiles were, or in areas where drones were, blah, 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 blah. Many of the examples that the Crenshaw's guest here was talking about. So once again, you could argue that that is a proper defense of their nation because of it, but you could also argue that let's put it this way. Ultimately, the question comes down to what is the correct response Israel should have done? Should Israel have responded with targeting specific military locations of Hamas leaders, of places where rockets are stored, of drones, many other names you could give, or should have Israel had no response, and potentially more rockets could have been launched and could have killed many more Israeli citizens. So that obviously those are two, you could say, extreme scenarios, even though one scenario is what Israel decided to do and the other is really the complete opposite of what Israel did. But I think that's ultimately the main question we have here, is the factor of what should have Israel done? Should Israel have responded with targeted missiles at military leaders of Hamas? Or should they have not done anything? Or should they have done something in between? And hello, True Turkman 24. Hopefully you're having a good day, good morning, good night, whatever time it is for you. But let's continue on to the video and see what Dan Crenshaw's response here was.
That's exactly what it is in Gaza.
Oh, thank you for the follow, Turkman. I appreciate that.
More nefarious purposes.
I read a story. I read a story that sloppy tweeting might have been purposeful, in order to get Hamas leadership to basically sequester themselves into that tunnel system, so that Israelis could more properly strike military targets, those military personnel, as opposed to other places where you might kill more civilians, and then that might have been an information operation intended to do that. I have no idea. Read one story about it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm going to be pausing this a lot. We are going to skip around. We're not going to listen to all of the hour of this podcast that Crenshaw has here. But I just wanted to quickly mention something. Israeli intelligence is usually extremely good, and the United States in the past has used Israeli intelligence quite a bit, because their intelligence is, well, very good. And what Crenshaw was kind of referring to is most likely probably what happened. And I don't really think that how do I say this? It makes sense if Israel decides that the best way to respond to this is attacking Hamas military leaders directly, to word the tweet that they're referencing, to be able to gather these gather these Hamas leaders into one area to have a direct targeting of it. So it would make sense for Israel to do something like that. And it does also make sense, if they were going to do something like that, to have had military intelligence suggesting that that should be the thing that they should do. Turkman says here, Israel attacked us, naval ships, and we were just quiet. They literally killed our troops without even apologizing. Where exactly was this? And I'm not arguing against you, Turkman. If you could give me a date or event, I would highly appreciate that, because there's been a ongoing history of attacks between Palestine and Israel, or whatever. Yeah, there's been ongoing attacks between the two major nations and other Middle Eastern countries versus Israel. Israel's kind of been the one nation versus almost all of the rest of the Middle East, and that's kind of been a ongoing problem there. But also, while I have you, Turkman, I am having a episode tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time, or 11 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. obviously, with my co-host Anna Voltes, and we're going to be talking about the same conflict we are mentioning here, versus Israel and the Middle East, and Israel versus Palestine. So it'll be interesting what he has to say about this whole situation, and we're going to do that tomorrow morning. And I see that you're also in the U.S., and I will check out that link. While I check it out, I'll play their response here.
No, I think that's very possible. Things aren't just done by the seat of their pants. Things aren't done without thought. They're usually very good about their plans and how they do it. And then also, when they're done with this operation, they'll go through and they'll do a proper AAR, or they'll do an after-action review where they go through and look, all right, what was our intent? Did we achieve it? What can we do better? What should we sustain and continue to do? So while it looks sloppy, yeah, I want to discount that opinion.
And I want to also know just some numbers for people. This is what I have most recently. Hamas has killed 7 Israeli civilians and injured more than 500. I don't have the numbers here on how many Hamas leadership has been killed and potentially how many civilians have been killed in Gaza. But it's also important to note that about 300 of the rockets that Hamas has launched have fallen within Gaza itself, injuring and killing Gazan civilians. What'll happen oftentimes is they'll blame Israel for that. They'll take a bunch of pictures.
And I did copy the link, so we will be checking that out here shortly, Turkman. I just want to play a little bit more of this podcast episode and see what Crenshaw and his guest have to say about the situation. And you probably know who Crenshaw is, but yeah, he's definitely a right perspective on this issue and definitely going to take Israel's side on this conflict. Almost fully take Israel's side with no nuance on the situation. Yeah. So let's just play a little bit more, and I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I do have the link.
They'll bring in toys, they'll put them on the scene, and then they'll take pictures of it and send it out. And our wonderful college activists here back in America, they believe it. They take it all in, hook, line, and sinker. It's just important to know these are just strategies. There's plenty of evidence for this, and people have to know this when you're assessing what's going on here. I want also quickly paint a picture geographically for people. When you're looking at Israel, let's see. It's it's in sort of a, I don't know, like a, what shape would you describe Israel in? It's like a pointy melon kind of. Okay, and on the west side of it, there's the Mediterranean Sea. Gaza is situated in that southwest corner. Okay, it is blocked off. It is like an island within Israel. It's on the coast. It's in that southwest corner. It's important to note that Gaza is run by Hamas, and the West Bank, which is also the Palestinian territory, is separate from that. There's nothing linking these two places. Israel is in between them both. The West Bank is where the Palestinian Authority has control. We're going to get into some internal politics within.
Turkman says it was on the USS Liberty. They literally Napalm strike and straight up shot our troops. And when they tried to deny it, USA found radio calls clearly stating that the IDF was aware it was a U.S. ship. Regardless, they still attacked. I've actually heard claims of that before, and definitely something Israel did that was very wrong. I think that's without any questions here. So, yeah, that's without any questions, like 100% so. And we will check out that link, no worries. I just want to play a little bit more, but I do appreciate that explanation, and really I don't know exactly what to say about that, because I would like to view that video and maybe to view a couple more sites kind of talking about it so that we can get some full context before I ultimately say anything in response. But obviously, if that is something that is completely wrong and definitely most likely a act of war for sure. So you could definitely see that Israel is at fault. Anybody who claims that Israel is fully innocent is not a true claim. Now, you could argue who is more innocent or who is more not at blame, but both parties are responsible to some extent to the conflict and what is happening. And other nations in the Middle East as well. No party is fully innocent when it comes to the conflict.
In the Palestinian politics here shortly as well. I think that's also important for people to note. But I just want to paint that picture so people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about Gaza. And also important to note, Lebanon is to the north of Israel, because we're going to talk about what Hezbollah.
I can definitely see what you said here. Turkman says, this event was blacklisted in the news in USA. That's the crazy. The survivors of this event were told never to talk about this. I could definitely see something like that happening because, how do I say this? Israel and U.S. have always been allies, so if Israel did attack and the claim is 100% truthful, which I have no reason to believe that it isn't 100% truthful, I could definitely see the U.S. having a idea to silence the implement on the news coverage of this to keep the ally with each other, Israel and the United States, at tact, and to probably blame another nation. Many countries have done this before, and you have seen it in World War II, you see it in World War I, you see it in almost every war, and you see it in a lot of other major events when it comes to two countries. The US has done it, Britain has done it, many nations have done something similar. So it would make sense that that could be the case as well. But let's fast forward just a little bit. I'm going to pick something random here. Let's go to exactly 30 minutes into this video. And I haven't seen the full video podcast here, so this was during the Cold War at the Reagan administration, so it kind of makes sense. Yeah, exactly like I was saying. It happens a lot. And I don't think that it's a good thing that it happens a lot, but just from an administrative perspective, you want to make sure that you keep your perception of being allies and being intact. I think I'm making sense. I think you probably understand what I'm trying to say here. But let's continue on.
Everybody tried to kill us and we survived, so we celebrate. Okay, got it. That's basically every Jewish holiday. So I just wore an eye patch to try it because I didn't have a costume or anything. It looks like Halloween, and everybody's like, Moshe Dayan, got it. And I was like, this is perfect.
Let's just skip. I don't know what he's talking about there.
And closes his eyes, and they think he's mumbling a prayer. They'll kick him off. Mm-hmm. If you're a Christian and you bring your Bible, you open it up, they'll kick you off. If you're thumbing your rosary beads, they'll kick you off. So when it comes to terms of worship, it's purely an Islamic site. So that's what's unique about it. So Hamas's demand was that Israel stop ensuring security on the Temple Mount. So they make that ultimatum. But in the days leading up to the outbursts of violence, more than normal, people on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, as the Night of Power and Eid approached, were forming into groups with Hamas flags and chanting anti-Israel, pro-Hamas slogans and trying to rile people up. And they were largely successful.
And this is part of the propaganda techniques that are used. Look, instigate some kind of conflict, get it going, knowing full well that on the world stage you can make yourself look like the victim. I mean, they've got this down to a science. I mean, I mentioned before they're how quick they are with social media, bringing toys to bombing sites. They've done this in the past. I don't know if they've done it this time, but it is a tactic used. They're experts at this.
Jerkman says, "Lo, what is this pro-Hamas terms, honestly? I don't think that they're pro-Hamas. That's such a general statement." Yeah, I mean, obviously Crenshaw and what he's trying to do here is, like I said earlier, take an extreme right perspective on Israel. And Israel is at no fault, and Israel is fully good, and there is no wrong. And as I've already said, that is not the case. Both sides are at fault. Once again, you could argue which side is worse, who was the worst enemy, if you want to put it in that way. But both sides are definitely not 100% truthful. And we had someone earlier bring up the fact that Hamas has used people as human shields, and that is true. That is a true claim. And it is a bad claim. But as he also said earlier, any killing of children is bad regardless of what nation you're from. And so, once again, Israel is at fault there because they have definitely killed children on the Palestinian Gaza Strip, whatever place you want to call it. And Yeah. So no side is fully right, no side is fully wrong, and nothing is as simple as Crenshaw and his guest are making it out to be. Now I'm going to play more of this video here, and I'm going to get a refill on some water so that I can continue on as we go through. So I'm just going to play this podcast, and I'll be right back in like probably 2 minutes. So make sure if you have any questions for me, you could definitely put questions in the chat section, or your thoughts of this whole situation from the history of this conflict to the events that are happening now. So I'm going to go ahead and get some water while we let this video play a little bit more. And this video is very right-leaning, which I knew it was going to be, so there's a lot of talking points to say, because it's never simple. I'll read Turkmen's comment and I'll get some water here. I mean, if Hamas was supposedly doing that, then send special troops to kill those bad guys instead of destroying a whole entire apartment, honestly. Well, to Israel's credit to what you're saying, they did call the apartment complex and hospital complexes and whatnot and told them to get rid of anybody who was in the complex. But you could also argue against that and say, well, why are you calling? Like, I mean, yes, you're allowing people to leave the complex, but why don't you send, as you say here, Turkman, specialized troops to be able to get into the situation and kill? And you could send those troops in advance and call. Basically, you could still send troops and still call, letting innocent people get out of the building, but still have the troops there to be able to go into the building and to kill the people who you see as enemies. And for Israel, that is the Hamas leaders. So you can still do both. And the reason why I said you can have the troops there is in case they decide to escape, you could have the troops there to kill the escapees of that building and blah, 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 blah. And that is a counter to why you just don't bomb why you don't bomb the building, because then you leave no escape chances. But anyway. So we'll play this video for a little bit more, and I'm going to get some water. Make sure to put your opinions on the situation that's happening now, or the history of the Middle East conflict, or any questions you have for me, and I will make sure to answer them, and I will be right back.
And maybe at this point too, we go backwards in time. Let's unpack this whole story with 6 Palestinian families being evicted due to a court order. So the families were given the homes by the Jordanian government after 1948. So what happened in 1948? Well, this was the time period where the British decided to pull out of what was then called Palestine and agreed to give the Jews a homeland. Right? Is that the correct technical way to say what was happening there?
Yeah. So it's a little bit complicated. So
everything is with this.
Of course. So prior to 1948, so the British government expressed support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The British. This was during World War I, when the Jews were aligning with some Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula, and it was all to fight the Ottomans. So I won't go too far back and delve too deep into that. But after the war and the Ottomans lost, the British had control of mandatory Palestine. They ended up splitting off what is now Jordan to become a purely Arab state. As the British Empire started declining, World War II comes about. Britain was trying to look for a way to extract itself from its colonial holdings and empire. So during this time, you had a lot of you had the creation of a Zionist movement, where European Jews were looking to get out of Europe to go to where they could be Jews and not suffer persecution. A lot of it was spurred on by the Dreyfus Affair, a whole thing about a Jewish French general who was accused of treason for nothing other than being Jewish. So this was even pre-Holocaust. So you had a lot of inflow of European Jews into.
Let's see. And True Turkman says, but Hamas was raided by Israel. That's the crazy part. I did not know that Hamas was created by Israel. that doesn't necessarily make. That is kind of crazy, actually. I'll have to think about that. That is definitely a little bit crazy. Let's just play this video while I find my computer charger, and then we can skip a little bit more and go to that video you showed me.
When they decided to leave, they're like, all right, how do we do this in a delicate way?
Real quick, it's important to note people have this idea that it's during World War II you have millions of Jews all of a sudden appearing in a Palestinian homeland. This is not the case. This for a long time Jewish families have been moving into this territory, and this is a very, very gradual process that basically just came to a head in 1948.
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, the British actually did not allow European Jews who had just been freed from concentration camps to enter into mandatory Palestine. They redirected boats to I forget if it was Cyprus or Crete, and put them in refugee holding camps. And that's because they didn't want the balance in the land to be too askew. So there had been some recommendations that, look, the populations need to be separated, land swaps, trade. British really didn't come to a solution. Who came to a solution was the UN. The UN voted in favor of creating a Jewish homeland and an Arab homeland. So leading up to this.
And he's about to talk about what we just read earlier of the United Nations getting involved and giving more land to Israel than Palestine. And that probably largely led to a lot more conflict between Palestine and other Middle East nations compared to Israel, because Israel got the biggest treatment and the biggest plus in land and the biggest plus in population when compared to the other nations. And many of the nations probably consider that to be unfair treatment. And like any negotiation, either as a peace treaty or a contract or anything you want to say, you want to get the better end of that contract, the better end of that stick, the better end of that situation. And Palestine and other Middle East nations probably consider themselves to not get the better end of the stick and be a little bit angry at the United Nations for giving Israel such favorable treatment. And that probably led to a lot more conflict in the future when it came to the Middle East. But let's continue just a little bit, and I'm going to grab that link.
There was a bit of a civil war with Arabs and Jews fighting each other in what is now Israel. After the vote, and actually today, May 14th, 1948, is the day that Israel declared, well, today's not May 14th, 1948, but on May 14th, 1948, that's when Israel actually declared its independence by the Jewish calendar, or by the Western calendar. So after Israel declared its independence, full-fledged war broke out. This new country that just said, we are our own thing now, was then attacked by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Iraqi soldiers came. So you had this small country, this small new country, that was facing the weight of the Arab world. So as this happened, you had a lot of populations. So when the UN said, this will be Israeli, or this will be Jewish, this will be Arab, those areas weren't exclusively Arab or weren't exclusively Jewish. So you had a lot of people start moving into the areas that were going to be, quote unquote, theirs. Well, then with the breakout of a full-fledged war, you had people fleeing war, which is what people do if you're not private.
Right.
So you had a lot of population movement. You had a lot of displaced people, and it was going in both directions.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry about that. We're losing connection just a little bit, but it looks like we're back up to green. So hopefully the stream didn't drop any frames there or anything. We're looking good. So I think we heard enough of this Kershaw video. There's not really anything else he's probably going to add on it. And yeah, I just was wanting to be interested to what Kershaw had to say there, because I knew where he was coming from an extreme bias. I don't know if Turkman is still here or not, but I'm going to go ahead and play just a little bit of that link he was put in chat about the bombing of the ship that he mentioned. So I'll let that go. And this is a 40-something minute long video, so we're not going to be able to play all of the video. We'll have to bounce around just a little bit. But as we wait for this video to load up on our terrible internet connection back home, he did mention that it was a attack on a ship and that the media tried to hide it and not put blame on Israel for directly attacking the Palestinian ship. Yeah, I believe it was Palestinian. You could definitely correct me if I'm wrong.
Early June 1967.
Stop.
The 6-day war in the Middle East.
Man, the connection's getting terrible. Okay, let's see. Turkman says, most Israeli citizens were not native to this land, so I can see how Palestinians are mad. Yeah, that's another thing for sure. Yep. Let's just play a little bit of this and we can skip
Between
around.
Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria is underway. A spy ship, very lightly armed, but bristling with antennae, steams into the Mediterranean to eavesdrop on the conflict. It is patrolling in international waters off the Egyptian coast. At 2 in the afternoon, on June the 8th, with the war reaching its climax, Israeli jets and motor torpedo boats launch an unprovoked attack on the ship. They drop napalm and strafe its decks with rockets, cannon fire, and armor-piercing rounds before trying to sink it with torpedoes.
We had no way to defend ourselves, and it was just, we're just slaughtered.
And they shot at the life rafts that were put into the water, and they shot the ones that were still on board the ship.
Bullet holes, shell holes everywhere, blood. The forecastle, the front part of the ship, was just red with blood.
Throughout the attack, the ship flies the Stars and Stripes, the flag of Israel's closest ally, the United States of America. Its name, the USS Liberty, is freshly painted on its stern, and the bow carries the distinctive numbers of an American naval vessel.
Out of a crew of just under 300, there were 34 killed and 172 injured in varying degrees to life-threatening, life-debilitating injuries. So that was more than 2/3 of the crew.
Terrible.
This audio tape, which has never been broadcast before, was recorded in real time by the Israeli military during the assault. The woman's voice in the background is counting down the seconds. It proves that Israeli commanders knew all along that they were attacking an American ship. For the first time, this and other evidence allows us to reveal the true story of what happened that day and what came after. When a deadly assault...
So that's what Turkman was mentioning. I believe that that's what you were mentioning earlier, which is rather interesting. And actually, I don't think I was thinking the way this video has been framed, because that was an Israeli attack on an American ship, which is a little bit different, because I think I was thinking that it was an Israeli attack on the Palestinian ship, and it is not the case. So by Israel attacking an American ship, that is directly going against the treaty that the nations had with each other, and a little bit more of a weird situation than what I have previously thought. And I'm not entirely sure why Israel would do such a thing. That doesn't really make that much sense. You can definitely let me know on timestamps on this video if there's any other parts that you thought I should check out. And we'll play a little bit more of the video, but we do have to move on to the last couple of sites I have before I have to get going for the end of this stream. But if you definitely have some parts of this video that you want me to check, we can definitely skip forward and do so. But I will play just a little bit more, and I can definitely play this video fully on a stream in the future if I decide to talk a little bit more in this situation, and if there is interest in doing so. I can, you can let me know a couple of ways, either on my Twitter or Discord. I'll put my Discord in here in case you do have a Discord. You might not, but anyway, I'll just go ahead and put that in. I mean, watch the whole thing on your free time. Yeah, I probably will watch the whole thing on my free time. If not, I'll keep it for a live stream, because I do like to watch this type of thing and give my feedback. And sometimes watching it on live stream is kind of fun, because you're able to get people and talk about it, and they give you more different insight than what you usually think about. But I'll just go ahead and post this for anybody who may be in chat and lurking or whatever. You definitely don't have to join it if you don't want, but we'll just listen to a little bit more before we move on here. If the video will play. Come on.
By
There you
one
go.
ally on another was covered up, and an American president was manipulated by the secret agents of a foreign power. Events that have shaped U.S.-Israeli relations ever since.
Oh, there's another ad. Why is there so many ads?
Get up, get moving, and gradually blend away gray for a subtle, natural look.
So many ads. Ugh. It's terrible. I really do need to re-download ad blocker. Oh yeah. Oh well. Let's just play a little bit more here.
The United States Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C., June the 8th, 2014. Every year, on the anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty, survivors, relatives, and supporters gather together.
It's a remembrance of those who were killed that day, the 34. I'm Dave Lucas. I was in charge of the deck force. I was 25. My first child was born when I was one day out on that cruise. So as long as they're survivors and maybe children of survivors, I think this will probably be an annual event.
And salute. Forward.
The names of the 34 killed are read out.
Oh. Jack Raper.
Punctuated by the tolling of a Navy bell.
David Marlborough.
And the playing
Oh my gosh. Okay.
of taps, the
never
traditional
mind.
military funeral lament.
Okay, well, I'll definitely check this out and watch the full thing, either on my free time or on stream, like I was mentioning before. I definitely think that this is an interesting watch for sure, and I'll definitely have to check it out. It's pretty long. Yeah, I mean, I watch long stuff all the time. I actually, before I did stream, I watched a couple of Las Vegas poker videos that were like hours long and documentary about people. Mainly cheating Vegas. I watch a whole bunch of long form stuff. Doesn't always have to be political, but I do tend to focus a lot on politics. Oh, so this is kind of some more recent events, and I wanted to basically start with some of the death toll numbers of the most recent conflict status with Israel and Palestine, and then we're going to get into the cease order and the most recent stuff I can find on the conflict happening right now, on if the situation is going to be reduced or the influence of that. So it states here, 9,300 new units in West Bank settlements advanced or approached in 2020. 43% unemployment rate in the Gaza Strip. 2,324 estimated number of deaths during the 50-day war of June-July 2014. We scroll down here. In the late April 2021, Palestine began demonstrating in the streets of Jerusalem to protest the pending evictions and residents of Judea, along with the other activists, began to host nightly sit-ins in early May after a court ruled in favor of the evictions. The protests expanded with the Israeli police developing force against the demonstrators. On May 7th, the following weeks of daily demonstrations and rising tensions between protesters, Israeli settlers, and police during the month of Ramadan, violence broke out. Compound in Jerusalem, with Israel police using stun guns, rubber bullets, and water cannons in a clash with protesters that left hundreds of Palestinians wounded. And this was in 2020, and this is one of the events that cited the attack in 2021 with Hamas targeting Israel. But let's continue on just a little bit. Wait a second here. Let me reshape so that we can actually see what is going on here a little bit better. Background, we want to go down to yeah, so that's just kind of an interesting thing, and there's some more stuff on there, but that's not really ultimately the focus that I wanted to have on this half of the issue. This article was by BBC News, and I just thought it gave a very good summary of the events and the conflict that is happening. So we're going to kind of speed through this summary here. Turkman says, the thing is, any other ward leader did this, they would be in trial as a war criminal. Benjamin Netanyahu, I always have trouble with his last name, needs to be in trial for illegal use of extreme force on civilians. And like I was saying earlier, that is a major claim that a lot of people have with the Prime Minister of Israel, and that his counterattacks were so harsh and so direct, and many people think that they are too harsh and too direct and not just simply self-defense, even if he does have more sophisticated weapons. So I can definitely see the perspective on things, and I'm not entirely sure where I stand on that issue. So let's go through their timeline here. 100-year Britain, Palestine. They got some images. We got a map, and this is kind of the main reason why I wanted to show this article before we get into some numbers directly. As you can see here, West Bank, Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, we have Israel and Palestine and whatnot. And we keep hearing that the Gaza Strip was firing on Jerusalem, and that West Bank was also being fired and also being targeted as well. So you can kind of see that from the map on what the boundaries look like today, and get a little bit of perspective on geography on what things. Let's move this. There you go. Now, sorry about that. Stop. There you go. Now you can see it. Okay. What's happening now? This is where I wanted to jump to. Tensions are often high between Israel and Palestine, living in East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. Gaza is ruled by Palestinian militant group Hamas, which has fought Israel many times. Israel and Egypt tightly control Gaza borders to stop weapons getting to Hamas. Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank say that they are suffering because of Israeli actions and restrictions. Israel say it is only acting to protect them from Palestinian violence. Things have escalated since the start of the holy Muslim month of Ramadan in the mid-April 2021, with nightly clashes between police and Palestinians. The threatened eviction of some Palestinian families in East Jerusalem has also caused rising anger. What are the main problems? There are a number of issues with Israel and Palestinians cannot agree on. These include what should happen to Palestinian refugees, whether Jewish settlement in the occupied West Bank should stay or be removed, whether the two sides should share Jerusalem, and perhaps most tricky of all, whereas Palestinian state should be created alongside Israel. Peace talks have been taking place on and off for more than 25 years, but so far have not solved the conflict. What does the future hold? honestly, I don't think the future is going to be that great, and I'm actually going to have a video on my YouTube channel about the conflict, and if I think that a treaty is going to be resolved, and if the situation is going to get handled, and either through peace treaty or if I see the conflict continuing. And I don't ultimately want to spoil my video. I'm going to have my YouTube on that, but let's just go ahead and read what BBC has to say about this situation. In short, the situation isn't going to be sorted out anytime soon. The most recent peace plan prepared by the United States when Donald Trump was president, called the Deal of the Century by Israeli Prime Minister, has been dismissed by the Palestinian as a one-sided and never got off the ground. Any future peace deal will need both sides to agree to resolve complex issues. The BBC's Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen says that the latest round of violence is the fourth big war between Hamas and Israel since 2008. He's seen previous wars end like this before. Similar things have been said by both sides in claiming victory, and then essentially the seeds of the next conflict are sown. I can tell you one thing for certain, that if the status quo does not change favorably, there will be another round of this. And this article was written in 5 days ago. So this is somewhat recent of an article, and also including the new information that happened in 2021. Let's go down here. We definitely need ad blocker, but that is okay. So now I'm going to play a video by President Biden about the cease order, and if a cease order is ultimately going to be reached, and what are the conclusions of such a thing. So we are going to go ahead and play this video real quickly about what Biden had to say about handling of the cease order and getting the cease order completely performed, if the video will decide to load. So of course we got an ad. So as I wait for the ad to load up on their site here, and think about why I haven't downloaded AdBlock, we'll wait and make sure there's no more comments. We're
the
looking
best
good.
part about dealing
Holy
with thousands
smokes!
of compliance regulation changes.
Well, that was loud. Hopefully that didn't blow your ears out. Rip any headphone users in chat. F in chat for headphone users, that is for sure. Alrighty, here we go.
Folks, I just spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Earlier today I spoke with President al-Sisi of Egypt. Prime Minister Netanyahu informed me that Israel has agreed to a mutual unconditional ceasefire to begin in less than 2 hours. The Egyptians have now informed us that Hamas and the other groups in Gaza have also agreed. In my conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close within less than 11 days. I also emphasized what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel. The Prime Minister also shared with me his appreciation for the Iron Dome system, which our nations developed together and which has saved lives of countless Israeli citizens, both Arab and Jew. I assured him of my full support to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system to ensure its defenses and security in the future. Over the last 11 days, I spoke with the Prime Minister 6 times. I've also spoken with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority more than once, and part of our intense diplomatic engagement. And I want to also thank the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, our National Security Advisor, and everyone on our team for their incredible efforts to bring this about, this outcome that we're about to see. You know, we've held intensive high-level discussions, hour by hour, literally. Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and other Middle Eastern countries, with the aim of avoiding the sort of prolonged conflict we've seen in previous years when the hostilities have broken out. I extend my sincere gratitude to President al-Sisi and the senior Egyptian officials who played such a critical role in this diplomacy. I also appreciate the contributions of other parties in the region who have been engaged in working toward the end of hostilities. These hostilities have resulted in the tragic deaths of so many civilians, including children. And I send my sincere condolences to all the families, Israeli and Palestinian, who have lost loved ones, and my hope for a full recovery for the wounded. The United States committed to working with the United Nations, and we remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet and relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for it. I want to thank you all. May God bless you all, and pray that this continues. Thank you so much.
And there's the media barrage. As we exit out this video, I'll move my webcam up to the top again and look at my crazy hair. Let's move this up. There we go. Move this back.
Well, it is concerning. John Podesta, who was chief of staff to Bill Clinton,
stop this autoplay.
W. Bush was coming into office, was the person that I had to work with. He was the chief of
Palestinian will win. 92 says Hamas and whatever are gonna take a shit on Israel. Turkman says, dude, chill, bro. I'm Turkish person and Palestinians don't have the military strength. Palestine says Turks are weak. Iran is the only one with balls. I don't think we need to necessarily get into that. We definitely don't want to. Yeah, just relax a little bit. We don't necessarily. Everybody should be on the. Just relax, calm down. I know this conflict is intense, but we don't need the gloves to come out and chat here, especially on an issue like this. We can talk about, if we think a hot dog is a sandwich, and we can fight about that. But we don't need to necessarily argue on what's in chat now. So let's see if I want to read anything in this article. I more just wanted to play it for that video. I think we'll start here. Yeah, we don't need to call out people in chat. I'll let it be just a little bit more, but just calm down just a little bit, 92. Just calm down just a little. We don't necessarily need to call anybody out, especially when you start talking about a group of people. So just relax a little bit and it'll be okay. But let's continue on here. The news of a ceasefire came on the heels of a call Wednesday between Biden and the Prime Minister of Israel. During that call, Biden said he expected a significant de-escalation in violence, according to the White House. One second here. Okay, let's continue on. It was their fourth conversation since violence erupted last week between Israel and Hamas, a Palestinian Islamic political party with armed wing of the same that controls the Gaza Strip. By the way, 92, I am going to reduce that timeout here. I didn't mean for it to be that long. We just need, just a little bit. Just relax just a little bit. We don't necessarily need... we don't necessarily need to be talking about that situation. You can hold those personal beliefs, but we don't necessarily need to hear those in chat necessarily. So, True Turkman says you make Palestinians look bad, bro. which is maybe true, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah. I will untime you out here shortly. We just don't need necessarily any of that. But let's continue on and keep our focus here just a little bit. It was their fourth conversation since violence erupted. Well, if y'all want to debate, then yeah, sure, I can untime them out. I don't care. Go for it. I just don't want anybody calling out people's nationalities. I don't think that that's necessarily that cool. You could definitely talk about what conflict you think is true and whatnot, but calling out a whole nationality is not necessarily something I am in favor of. It was the fourth conversation since violence erupted last week between Israel and Hamas, a Palestinian Islamic political party with an armed wing of the same name that controls the Gaza Strip. By the way, Palestine 92, I untimed you out, so if you're still listening, you can chat once again. Just, yeah. Keep it civil. In the address on Thursday, Biden extended his condolences to Palestine and Israeli families who lost loved ones and reaffirmed that the U.S. would work with the United Nations and others to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza and help the territory rebuild. And he said by this: "We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, in a manner that does not prevent Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal," Biden added. The White House, in the days leading up to the ceasefire, purchased a strategy of what is called quiet, intense diplomacy behind the scenes. We have had over 60 calls from the president on down, the senior leaders in Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and other leaders in the region. Since the start of the conflict, White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Pierre told the reporters Wednesday. True Turkman says, "Yo, bro, you want to talk on Discord?" Unfortunately, I can't talk today because I only actually have about 9 minutes left before I have to be somewhere. But I might be able to talk on like a Friday because tomorrow I have my podcast with my co-host Anna Voltes, and then I do my podcast on my own show later in the day. But we could definitely arrange something on, like, say, Friday or maybe next week, and we can talk about this situation or another situation if you want. I'm definitely free for that, but unfortunately I won't be able to do that today. But let's continue here just a little bit more in this article. Biden appeared... Palestine says, "Bro, Turkey is just saving face. If they cared about Palestinians, they would form a coalition and attack Israel. All they do is talk. Palestinian, they don't have any militants attacking Israel." Palestine says, "I don't have Discord." True Turkman says, "Bro, the Palestine dude, let's discuss one day." Oh, you want to talk on Discord? Oh, okay, yeah. I got what you're saying now. Well, you should probably get a Discord. I mean, it's a little bit complex at first, but I'm all for Discord. It leads to pretty good conversations on there, at least with the right people. Can definitely be a little bit crazy. That is for sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the ceasefire, and this is by the Washington Post. Ceasefire aimed at ending 11 days of fighting between Israel and Hamas takes effect. Jerusalem. A ceasefire aimed at ending 11 days of withering combat between Israel and Hamas militants took effect early Friday, hours after Israel's Security Cabinet voted to approve an Egyptian initiative to stop the fighting. The cabinet, made up of top security officials and ministers, voted unanimously to accept what Israel described as bilateral and unconditional ceasefire, facing mountains of international pressure, including from President Biden in recent days. The Israeli government said it decided to bring in the air and artillery campaign to halt after significantly degrading Hamas military infrastructure and killing many of its commanders. Hamas, which discovered the Gaza Strip, said it had also argued with the Egyptian proposal, which came into force at 2 a.m. local time. The Palestinian residents will abide by this agreement as long as the occupation is committed, said the media advisor. The conflict has taken a toll. Israel pounded Gaza with the airstrikes and artillery fire, causing extensive destruction and killing 232 Palestinians, including at least 65 children, local health officials said. Hamas ferociously rocketing left 12 dead in Israel, 2 of them children, and sent residents of much of the country repeatedly fleeing for shelter. I'll let them talk it out there. And we'll go down here to what they want to know. Israel and Hamas agreed to an Egyptian ceasefire initiative after 11 days of conflict. The Palestinian death toll in Gaza rose to 232, including at least 65 children, local health officials said in the West Bank. At least 21 Palestinians have been killed since Friday, and the death toll is to be increased. So, do I think a ceasefire is going to stay? I don't necessarily think that the ceasefire is going to stay. I think it would be good if it does stay, but I just don't necessarily see the conflict being resolved in a ceasefire unless a peace treaty is made with both nations, and that would have to change drastically because Palestine would be seeking different motivations than Israel, and both would have to meet in the middle, and I ultimately don't necessarily see that really happening. Last thing I wanted to show here was just some charts and images, and this was this was London. That's not what I want. We don't want that. Where did I see that? I think there was this one here, where you just see the bombing map here and how many places were ultimately getting targeted. Actually, you don't see it because it is over my webcam for y'all. So let me move it so y'all can see what I'm talking about here. This is the main thing I am talking about, is right here. Whoop, let's move this back. It's right here with the bomb sites on targeting areas and whatnot. And you could see many of these, and I think I saw one on a research website, like Pew Research, on one of those. So that is kind of interesting for sure. Now we have to find somebody to raid into. I think we're gonna go ahead and raid into. One second here. I'll let you guys continue out your debate for a little bit. I need to figure out one thing real quick. Here it goes. Can I move this up? Shoot. Ah! Yeah, I'm trying to move this real quick so that I can read some of the comments before we get out of here just a little bit. Having some technical issues with my monitor. Oh, no, don't want that. Nope. Okay. I think I'll do this. I got it up on my phone here. Yeah, I'm down to talk tomorrow, blah, 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 blah. For one, Americans are going ballistic on how Turkey is committing genocide. Yeah, that's also the bad thing. I think hella Muslim countries need to time up if America's gonna spread them all. Also, the Arab nationalism goes against ever receiving help with Turks. Dude, Arab nationalist leaders copy the nationalism of Turkey, but then want to hate the Turks. You can read the comments. Yeah, let's grow up more. Y'all had a little bit more. If Turkey invaded Israel, everyone in the world would look as Turks as Nazis, and Turks are not going to do that, bro. Turkey has manpower and the technology to do so. And it looks like he agreed with you on that, and he wanted to talk, so that is not a bad thing as well. I'm going to... Dang it. How do I do this real quick? We don't want this. Okay. Alrighty, let's see here. But it'd be interesting to see kind of what happens from all this situation. I'm gonna go ahead and refresh the chat just so I can be able to see the comments here. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to do that elsewhere. I need to figure out how to remove that one chat box and whatnot, but I'll be able to figure that out eventually. It should still show the messages on my screen, so I know I see all of your messages still. But we're gonna go ahead and raid a streamer that y'all are probably gonna have a lot of laughs with, and you can probably definitely bring up this stuff as well to her. She is extremely funny, and she's talking about Canadian politics, and she is definitely left-leaning. She calls herself a anarchist, even though I have my questions about if her version of anarchy is actual anarchy and not something else. But she is extremely funny, and I think y'all guys would really enjoy her. And you can definitely bring up the Palestine or in Israel conflict, and she'll probably have some stuff to say about it as well if you want. But we're going to go ahead and raid into her here shortly. Make sure to check out my show, Getting Answers, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time and 11 a.m. Central Time or 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And we will go ahead and check that out. And I'll have my podcast later in that day as well. But let's go ahead and raid into her.
I'm too naughty. Oh my word. Oh my word. Is this a debate stream? Can you read? Because in the description link below, there's some words. Jesus Christ! Oh, my gravy! Wyatt! Oh, my gravy! Welcome! Thanks for the raid! Holy shit snacks! Oh, Wyatt! Oh, what's your stream? I hope you're well. I hope you're well. We just watched Wyatt. Oh, Jesus Christ, I feel like showing it for you. Wyatt. Chat, do I have to show it a third time? Thank you very much. Chat, do I have to show it a third time? Because Wyatt didn't see it. We just finished watching a clip. And, oh, my gravy. Yeah, no. If you want to see it, Wyatt, I'll stop. Good God. So right now, we're dealing with this person here who is raiding my stream, Wyatt, and I genuinely would love for you to watch, would love to go down, Wyatt, if you're here. If you're not too tired, I know sometimes after a stream it can get kind of daunting and you're like, oh, I don't really want to stick around. But we have somebody here in chat. His name is Gavin4507. Okay? And Gavin says, is this a debate stream? And I've asked him, what email it to you? Do we not do emails? I still do like letters where I go to the post office. I still do that. We don't do email anymore? What do we do? We just Discord it. Well, Wyatt, I'll Discord it with you. Okay? Yeah, I'll Discord it with you. So, I just asked Gavin if they know how to read, because I genuinely hope they do. They've said, is this a debate stream? And I would encourage them, if they can read, to read the description box below, where it says, "I will not debate you." Okay. So I hope you can read, and I hope you can sort of back your arse out and close the door behind you, because I will not debate you. And I really, really get irritated when people derail a stream. Just saying. My God. Oh, there you. Yeah. There. Okay. There's the clip. There you can. There you go, Wyatt. You can watch it at your own pleasure. I wonder what happened to the pro-patriarchy lady. She couldn't keep the convo on subjects. I guess she moved on to more patriarchal pastures. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This here breaks my heart that somebody here was speaking and said this regarding the minister Adriana LaGrange and how shitty. Excuse me. I burped it up again. Another chud. God damn it, these bubble chuds just keep. They just won't stay down, chat. Shit weasels will just shit, I guess. Okay. So, as I'm chewing, sorry, ASMR here. This person, this breaks my heart. This